Kim, what do you see as you look at these businesses? What are telltale signs that maybe things are not as they need to be? Or that they are as they need to be?
I know you gave some great examples, very positive ones too. So maybe I'll be on the naughty side then. So some of my research right now that's getting a lot of traction, and it has a fun title, and it started out as fun, is the Fredo effect. And I assume everyone here has seen The Godfather. And part of it started, I grew up in family businesses, several of them, and everyone has one, you know what I mean, or knows of a family member who is their own Fredo. If you remember The Godfather, it was the son who, he was the middle child actually. You know, Michael was younger, and he just wasn't suited for the business. And they kept giving him, you know, these Mickey Mouse jobs and trying to get him to do the least amount of harm. And it's always been a very taboo topic. It's something that's talked about kind of behind closed doors. And since doing my research, and we've even done it in our Center for Family Business where we've watched fun clips from The Godfather, but getting people to really, really talk about it. And what's a danger is if you keep providing jobs for family members automatically, very quickly the family business can become a welfare institution. A business has to grow exponentially in order to keep up with the pace of growth of a family. It's almost impossible. So we tend to use the prune the family tree. But you know, really,
that's fun at Thanksgiving, isn't it?
Yeah, and you know, it's tough though, because you know, I mean, we can understand how, you know, you've got these two different norms. The family norm is you allocate resources based on need or equally. In a business, the norm is, you know, resources are distributed based on merit. You earned it. And in a family business, those collide. And it's difficult. One family business I worked with, you know, I mean, the father knew he had a Fredo. And we use it, you know, that's fun to use it because I think it kind of brings it down and makes it humorous. But, you know, the dad said, Kim, what can I do? No one else will hire him. He is my son. And he is a burden on the family. He really, really is. And the father is very nervous about what will happen to him when they pass. So, you know, when we think about these things intellectually, you know, you could be like, okay, yep, you know, let him go.
Right.
But as a parent, what do? You're going to just let your child go. So it's really hard finding them jobs. So a really good family business, you find, you know, usually it's some kind of council creates different rules for what gives a child a job in the business. And this becomes particularly important when you start having cousins and extended branches, so that they have to have a minimum education. They have to have so many years experience elsewhere before they come in. A lot of them have to have, you know, the grunt work. They've had to work the factory floor or done dishes in the kitchen and so forth, and they really earn their place. And then a family business has to think about, what always worries me is when you only see managers with the family last name. You know what I mean? Because you'll lose your best talent. You were just talking about talent. You know what I mean? Think of it, all of you who want family members, if you know there's a glass ceiling there and you won't get a promotion because you don't have the right last name, you're going to jump ship eventually. So a really smart family business thinks about who they're bringing in, and it's methodical, it's formalized. And they make the children have to earn a job in the business. And I know some family businesses will not create a job for a child. The job has to be available and they have to compete for it. So they try and run themselves as professional as possible. And of course you find places for the family members. It doesn't mean, this is something that always comes up, they think because a child doesn't have a job, they're not going to have earnings. You can still give stock to a child. You know what I mean? There's other ways you can take care of them. And you can still get family members involved by having, you know, the family councils and boards and so forth. So there are different ways. And that's where belonging to a center or working with someone from FFI really does help you. And even with a center, you hear that your problems are similar to someone else's. You know, and that's what part of it is, just knowing that some of the things you're dealing with, other businesses are dealing with too.
So when Ted Turner told his son, "You're toast," you applauded.
Yeah, well, you know, for the stockholders, it's great. But no, it's tough. It's a tough one.
Yeah. In terms of getting a handle on this strategy and planning, is this like so many other things in life that it's just not the most fun thing to do when you're running a business? It's much more interesting to focus on day to day.
I'm not sure I would say that, Eric. Strategy doesn't have to be dull, and it can be made fun. But I'm going to pick up on that because everyone who's been through a strategic planning process understands what a SWOT analysis is, right? Strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. It's a cornerstone thing one goes through.
Hopefully.
Yes.
Well, let's assume it's
Yes.
done well.
Yes.
Its danger of relying only on that is getting more acute because it is a static picture of an organization at an instant in time. And it can create false security. And the real strategic health of a business, think of the SWOT analysis as the organization's cumulative energy. When you add it all up, either whether it's on a positive side of the scale or a negative side of the scale, it is a collection of assets, talents, positions in the business, technologies, that when you add them all up, it's the energy of the business. But it's static. And there's another part of the business that is related to energy, even in its origin. The term is related to energy in its origin. But it also has to be concerned, the business also has to be concerned about its capacity to change. And its capacity to change for the better, which means not being blindsided by change that it has to react to after the fact. And those issues are much more difficult to get at. They're cultural, they deal with how they value success, what happens when you try something new and it fails. What's their policy for infusing fresh blood now and then rather than always being the same people who get promoted up the ladder? What's the policy for paying out the earnings to the shareholders or the family members versus reinvesting it? All of these things can be charted and evaluated where you can assess, on top of the SWOT analysis, the energy, what's the business's propensity to change? Because the two are going to be linked. And if you can't change, the energy is by default is going to erode. Think of Toyota. 2006, who would have not thought of Toyota to be not only a juggernaut in the global auto industry, but almost in a class by themselves? Maybe Honda was not far behind. And then what happened to Toyota? 2008, 2009, 2010, with a recall, with bad publicity, with the inability to deal with it and face it and be honest about it. They were not a juggernaut. They're coming back now, but a price gets paid. When the energy dissipates over time, you don't ever go back. There's no mulligan where you can go back to the beginning and have everything else be exactly the way it was back then. Something has changed in the meantime, and you lose something. Even a Starbucks. The founder came back, but only after, by overexpanding, by even the move into food. Who knows why the biggest consumer complaint Starbucks got about going into hot food?
Anyone? No baristas?
The very good Starbucks customers complained that the aroma of the food drowned out the aroma of the coffee. And so, they were a juggernaut, but they went in the other direction as a Toyota. They went to the point of too much change and overextending themselves, not only their business model, but too many places. The stock started going down, and they've come back, but something is lost in the meantime. And so a really strong strategic health now has got to not only take that SWOT analysis, but realize that it's a static analysis. And you also have to have with that the ability of the organization and how it organizes itself, how it rewards people, how it deals with failure, how does it deal with the pains in the rear end, people that are hard to get along with, the contrarians.
Who's ever been in a company like that?
And what happens to those people? Because if you don't have them and you drive them away, that's not a characteristic of a business that's going to be able to deal with change in advance. It's the other way around. Because the word will get around that the great people, the really creative people, don't want to work here. You've mentioned Steve Jobs a number of times. How many have read the book, the Jobs biography? If you haven't read it, you should. It's not hard reading. It's fascinating.
Fantastic book.
But when he came back to Apple the second time, after Apple was in the tank, and they brought him back, one of the things that struck me was he realized that the really great product, he didn't believe in focus groups, by the way. He couldn't care less about what a customer would say we ought to be doing, because they don't really know what they want until they see it. But he was a genius in that he realized that the really great products, whether it was the iPod and the getting into the music altogether, the real great stuff came at the boundary between art and technology. And whenever you're dealing with things at a boundary, that's where things get lost. But if you read, there's a quote in his book that I've used in the Brussels presentation, where really it also almost reverses the definition between right brain and left brain, where he said the technologist has got to be the creative, off-the-wall thinker, and the artist has to be the disciplined one. And that's kind of a reversal. And that's part of what strategy, really great strategy, has to be. It has to understand that part of it is an enigma. And no rule always applies, and you have to constantly be looking and rethinking things.
Which is one of the most complicated things, and Kim, I'm curious, picking up on that. When you're in a small business, you start a business, you're scratching and clawing, you're working God knows how many hours, your heart and soul is in it. How do you determine how long to give those changes, strategies a try? How do you know when to say when? I mean, I guess if we all knew, we'd all be on a beach, but just some basic markers of this might be a good time to keep going or this might be a good time to kill it.
Well, when you're talking about strategies within the business or even tactical strategies, generally, because entrepreneurs, you do have to be careful with things like overcommitment and escalation of commitment and their egos. Generally, it is a really good idea to kind of have a point where you're going to stop throwing good money after bad. So almost before you launch it, you have a plan in how long you're going to give it a try, because it does take time. But also, whenever you have innovation entrepreneurship, you've got to be willing to also accept failure. So you've got to, in your mind, know this might not work out. And when are we willing to pull the plug? So some of it is the thinking beforehand and the planning to say, this is how much we'll lose. And you see a lot of large companies do this. A lot of large companies know how much a product should be making in order to be a success. And if it doesn't, by this period of time, they pull it. So an entrepreneur should follow suit with that, because it is difficult. You know, I've seen entrepreneurs, typically we think of growth time as a good time. But during growth, many times you actually need an influx of cash. And you see a lot of businesses right at the edge of success go bankrupt because of cash flow problems. Generally, businesses don't fail because of lack of sales. They fail because of lack of cash. They can't pay employees and so forth. So part of it is really on determining what their cash cycles is. You kind of hinted at diversification. There was a while that a lot of the popular business press was pushing for diversification. Our latest research now shows that actually usually it's bad. It's bad for performance, because they end up doing things that they're not good at or their customers don't accept and so forth. So, you know, it's okay to go into new areas, but again, that's why you have to know your values and your mission, how customers see you, what are you good at and so forth, and thinking about it that way. So, and that's also, you know, part of, one of the reasons to read. Harvard Business Review does an excellent job of taking the latest research and translating it for practitioners, because what worked in the 80s and 90s, we now know does not. And if some people are following this advice you might have learned when you were in college, or some of these, even these great books that you even mentioned, Porter's Forces have changed. It doesn't work anymore. And with change, I know. Well, it's been added to, it's been adapted. So, it's so important that we're constantly, learning. And entrepreneurship is a brand new field. It's an incredibly new field. So as I mentioned to you, strategic planning we have found to not significantly impact performance. Even my own research has shown it. And so it's kind of like now we're starting to say, well, why? Oh, well, now it's about the process. And, you can't just check off the box, and you've got to be flexible and adaptation. We're talking about now, the term is creative destruction, very similar to what you're saying what Steve Jobs does, where there were products very similar to Apple's products, but they didn't have the marketing and they didn't have the ease of use. That's what they were known for. When they did it, they made it idiot-proof. You know what I mean? They made it so easy. And of course, they had the platform. They had the platform with iTunes that the other companies didn't have. And so when they did it big. But they kept to that ease of use, and so forth.
So you can't just read the Bible and pray that it works. You also have to read it.
I mentioned earlier about the danger of adding financial risk and strategic risk at the same time. And I think Kim has hit on that. I'm going to give another example. This is a true one. This is a company, let's say, in the $50 million range, where it had a new owner, a very hard-driving entrepreneur, new product person. And the company hadn't grown in years. He brought in a lot of new people, talented people. A new plant was being started up, and all at one time, 4 new products into different channels of distribution were all being entered into at the same time. In every one of those channels, there was already competition, competent competition that had market position and were not likely to roll over and play dead. A beautiful new manufacturing facility was in a startup mode and hadn't been fully debugged yet. Key people, very good people, whether they were sales, marketing, product development people, had all been brought in and had been there less than a year, and a new bank. The company was overextended financially. They were on a very short leash. All the loans were being guaranteed by the entrepreneur and his wife, and all of this was going to happen at the same time. That is a high-risk strategy where the strategic risk is all the new products with new people into new channels of distribution. The products were great. They fit the profile that they should have to be going into new markets where the competition already existed. But it was a tremendous amount of strategic risk on top of financial risk where there really was no room for error before they would be in violation of loan covenants. And those of you who are in the financial industry, you know what that means, and the tone changes.
The example he's talking about is when Hostess tried to make healthy Twinkies, in case anyone's... let's take a few questions from the audience for our... Go ahead.
You have, when your clients come to you, you have a reasonably motivated person who is either in trouble or is interested. Once you get over the threshold, what techniques do you get to keep them interested, following the plan? You're dealing with one person who controls most things, and what are your tricks and trades, theory degree combinations?
Ed, that is a great question, and my first rule is always to just be myself. And you do have to establish trust when in many cases they don't really want you there. They may not want to admit it. If it's a lender who told them to call me, that's even worse. Because the lender, no matter how long the relationship may have been, it has turned adversarial. And the lender is no longer their friend.
It's a board committee.
So you talk to them, you meet them, You sense whether the chemistry is there or it's not, because sometimes it just isn't.
You back off when that happens?
And it usually takes care of itself, but I will try to hear what they're saying, understand the problem, get them to realize that there may be some answers, and if we're open, we can work with each other, and let it go from there. And then if there'll either be some trust and confidence built up that there could in fact be good times ahead, but let's work at it together.
Do you use case studies? Or
I will use examples. I usually can't give names, obviously, but you use examples and try to see where you've seen certain things before. But you also have to realize that every situation, especially in a family business, everyone has its own idiosyncrasies, and what may have been the case in 5 others, you got something new here that you've never seen before, but you have to figure it out. And
what?
Oh, go ahead.
I act benign.
yeah.
And when I can, and you're talking about really complex situations, but when I can, when it's an entrepreneur, as much as I can, I try and make it appear like it's their idea. And we stumbled upon it together. Entrepreneurs hate being told what to do. And it's not unusual for, if I can plant this seed in their head and act like it was us and we came to it together, it's not unusual for them to come back weeks or months later and they kind of have this epiphany, I guess, and they're like, you know what, that was a good idea. I think I want to try it. Because I think it's when their business, they've got to take ownership of it, and I find that it's really important that when they have to be able to make it theirs, which means that it has to have wiggle room for change. But I find, particularly with a founder, they're the most difficult, that I have to act extremely benign. I'm not here to hurt you. And working together and trying to come up with solutions together as much as possible. And of course, using stories does help, using and making them feel confident and being incredibly patient and empathetic.
I'm sure it's an art.
Yes, ma'am.
At what stage in the business did you start considering the succession plan? That's A. And B, and what if you know the second generation is just not capable of running the business? What does the succession plan look like at that point?
Okay, well, what we hinted on before is I think there should always be a kind of a short term in case something tragic happens, a short term plan. And that's sometimes the easiest way to get the entrepreneur to start thinking about it. Because there's always a story. Remember what happened to Joey down the street and the plant was on, and then starting to think long term. Second generation isn't interested. I would never, ever force them. We call it placeholders. Sometimes, if you want to remain in the family and you think a third generation may have the skills and the abilities to not only sustain the business, but to really thrive and survive and take it to the next level, there's nothing wrong with having non-family members be at the helm. There's absolutely, and it should be embraced. Of course, I'm sounding a little bit down on family members. I think we also need to remember when it comes to a family business, you have the incredible opportunity to groom someone from birth. Like, they have this tacit knowledge. They've learned the business, the trade, they have the language, they know the culture. And, in a perfect scenario, you can groom that person to be an incredible leader. If your business needs more technology, you can send them to get an engineering degree. If you're a techie, you can send them to get a business degree, what have you. But so I think we have to also remember that it sounds like I'm being down on family members. In a perfect scenario, gosh, it works wonderfully. But for the second generation, I think I would think of professional management. However, I should also mention, because I teach family business, it's not unusual, I don't know the ages, it's not unusual for children in their 20s to say they don't want it. They want to go out on their own, they want to make a name for themselves, and it's generally in around their 30s that all of a sudden they come back. I think it's very important, though, they have that freedom to go out and then it's available to them. But it's actually not unusual at all for children in their 20s to not want it. That's probably one of the most common things, actually
Because they've been surrounded by it.
yeah, they want to go out on their own. What's most dangerous is actually a child who's not thinking of anything else and thinks they have no other, and they're looking at it as a permanent job, a gimme job, and so forth. Those are the ones actually most dangerous. Do you want to add?
I can't add a whole lot. I think that it's more common that they wait too long and have to deal with a succession issue at an inopportune time or not at all. I wouldn't say the sooner the better, because sometimes in an entrepreneurial business, it's the outside advisors can help at times. Say, we ought to, what would we do if something happened to you, or if we lost our director of engineering, do we have somebody to take his or her place? And put in place a competent human capital development program within the company. Maybe it's only a couple of people, but that person's job will include, do we have the next level of talent in various places where the business is going to depend upon it.
Let's get one last question before we turn it back over to Cheryl.
I'm a banker, nobody throw anything. But we work with a lot of community bank, we work with a lot of small businesses. How do you deal, and I've seen this now many times in this economy, I call it the damaged goods syndrome. You've got a company that has really been to the brink and come back. And now you've got management trying to innovate, and everyone's still in lockdown defensive mode. What tools do you use to bring them back into fighting spirit? I mean, what kind of suggestions?
In this economy?
Well, I know that, but
Because they're nervous.
They're nervous.
I'm in mass, and they're not, I mean, even successful businesses are not growing. They're not hiring, they're not investing. It's awful.
But I've got one that actually has an itch.
Yeah.
How do you get the management's come through intact, employees have, but the management's having a hard time getting the employees back to rowing together, back into the spirit when they're actually seeing the light. How do you snap
Ooh,
that
it sounds like you need OB-ish kind of stuff.
Yeah, well, it might depend upon whether or not there's someone who's truly an obstacle, as opposed to being scared. If there is an individual or a place that is truly an obstacle, then you might have to deal with that through surgery. Okay. And get it over with and move on. The other is there needs to be some visionary or some outside, some force there that can get them to believe that, we've been through this and we have a plan, and we now think we have the right people in the right place. We're not trying to do more than we can do. And
sounds like they need team building, though. Like
yeah,
what we did in the 80s. I think we really...
There may need to be
team building. Small successes, too. I think, you need to bring everyone together, and even if it's something small, they need to start celebrating and feeling good. And it'll take a while, but it has to start building in the culture. And, those kinds of things. But I would almost take out, remember the OB classes in the 80s where team building was really popular and organizations were willing to spend money on it. It really does work. We know with entrepreneurial firms, it's incredibly successful in getting people to put in 110% and so forth. So I would try some of that. And then any small success you can find, really celebrating it and starting even the Friday pizza and beer kind of things, because it sounds like they've got to build the culture. And as long as people are fearful and nervous about their jobs, that we know that hurts performance. It hurts job performance and so forth. So it's those basic things that we need to come back to.
I've seen a couple of situations where the psychologist that has come in is there really to deal with the people who are still there and not the ones that may not be there anymore. And that the culture and the human side, assuming that there's not just an obstacle that is in the way. bring them back, start to bring them back that way where they believe in themselves.
Yes.
Let's thank Ron Norelli and Kim Eddleston for their expertise.
So this is the part of my job that I don't like because I have to stop the conversation. And for that, I apologize. I know that I can speak for Kim. I know she's here for a little bit longer. Ron, I don't want to infringe on your time, but our campus is open until 9 o'clock. There's plenty of food out there. And so I would encourage you to stay and ask specific questions if you'd like, or if it sparked a conversation that you'd like to have with some folks, please stick around and do that. Please join me in officially thanking Ron and Kim, and this is one of our Local Leaders Global Impact Globes.
Oh, how lovely.
And when you work for the university, you don't normally get university gifts, so we figure you need one of those. Thank you both. I was reflecting in the back of the room that at our last topic, we were talking about innovation and entrepreneurship, and everyone just felt like alive and pumped up and ready to go, and I thought this was a great dose of reality. So thank you. I mean, not that it was a downer, not a downer, but really, I mean, a good dose of reality, because I think that's where a lot of businesses, you know, fail to see the reality and plan accordingly. So we so much appreciate your insights on this. For those of you here, we will do our next Local Leader Global's Impact Series January 31st here on campus. The topic is public education, pre-K to PhD perspectives. We'll have Dr. Heath Morrison, who is our new superintendent of CMS, here with Dr. John Labrie, who is the dean of our College of Professional Studies and vice president of professional education here. So please look for information on that. Tell friends if you have those that are interested in education. We are officially adjourned, but feel free to stay on the campus as long as you'd like, and thanks for coming.